Hello and welcome to the Broadcast Newswrap, your shorthand guide to the week's TV news stories brought to you by the Broadcast Journalist Squad and many others. I'm senior reporter Max Goldbart, and Insight editor Jesse Whittock joins me this week to chow down on some PSB, as grandees have their say and a 10-strong panel is assembled to oversee the future of this country's wavering public service broadcasting sector. And later, I'm delighted to welcome Emmy-nominated director Jenny Ash, who takes us behind the scenes of her upcoming Channel 5 documentary on the Nuremberg trials. All that, plus a little bit of what we've been watching on this week's Broadcast Newswrap. So delighted to welcome once again our Broadcast Insight editor Jesse Whittock. Jesse, how are things?
Yeah, all right, Max. There's just been a massive downpour outside my house. Hopefully that's not a sort of precursor for the day, but no, broadly I'm all right apart from the weather.
Christ, yeah, hopefully not a metaphor for things to come. And I welcome you on our 25th Broadcast Newswrap. Did you ever think when the two of us were sat recording the first Broadcast Newswrap that we would ever get here?
We were like intrepid reporters, intrepid explorers, in fact, or intrepid reporters, I suppose. We went out into the big wide world of podding, and here we are at a quarter century. What an achievement, Max. We should have a little glass of wine this evening.
25 pods. Well, I'm excited. And as we've been speaking, the downpour has reached Dalston, so that's interesting.
Oh, there you go. And it's actually left Twickenham, so it's obviously moved across London.
Shifting across. The downpour is celebrating our 25th podcast. But we're here, more seriously, we're here to talk about PSBs. It's felt like a almost formative week for the future of public service broadcasting. Yet another review, this time from the government, Oliver Dowden's DCMS, has been kickstarted. So that works alongside a review by Ofcom and a review by the DCMS committee. So that's 3 reviews. We've also had the formation of a 10-strong panel, including super indie bosses, grandees, and the odd BBC skeptic thrown in there for good measure. Elsewhere, Mark Thompson and Michael Grade both used their outside-the-box appearances, the Freeview event that took place earlier this week, to talk tough on the future of this country's public service broadcasting sector. There was particularly bad news for Channel 4, which was given 5 and 10 years respectively to survive by these 2 former chief executives of the channel, unless it does something drastic. Jesse, what did you make of all this first of all? And I know we're going to come on and to talk about the panel.
I suppose the most kind of broad thing you can say about it is it's if you work at a public service broadcaster in a management position at the moment, you must feel under huge scrutiny. Like you say, Max, 3 separate probes into the future of what the sector will look like is going to mean a lot of meetings, a lot of hours spent debating the minutiae of what it means to be a public broadcaster. And I suppose so it's quite unsettling, really. There aren't going to be any quick wins or quick answers here. But I do think that, there does need to be some sort of clarity as to what each of these reviews will focus on quite quickly, because it's sort of only fair to the people working within the sector that they know what they're facing, in the next few years.
Yeah, I don't know how much sort of administratively or organisationally is involved with this stuff, but it does feel like this real solid focus on quite existential questions that at the same time involve quite a lot of work comes at a time when we're sort of in an economic recession. It's very difficult to, it's slightly different with the BBC, but it's very difficult to run a commercial broadcaster at the moment. So I don't know if there is a slight feeling of oh God, not another one, more work for me while I try and do my best to increase ad revenues and move forwards.
I did find Mark Thompson's sort of vision for Channel 4 quite interesting. Effectively saying that Channel 4 needs to internationalize to an extent to survive. So he talks about there being a massive opportunity for the Channel 4 brand to be sort of exported around the world in some form or the other. I quite like the idea of Channel 4 as a sort of big global international brand, but I don't, to be honest, think that there is necessarily a crying need out there in the US, over in Asia, in Australia, for Channel 4 to sort of make an impact. Obviously, it's possible that could happen, but I don't quite see it, right? And in the same extent that I think that, you know, BBC Three has been a really, I think, broadly a very sort of positive brand for the BBC, and has done really good work. And it's sort of playing sort of, you know, somewhere in the same space that an internationalised Channel 4 would play in, but it's made no inroads, right? But you could speak to people in other countries about what BBC Three is, and they wouldn't have a clue. And I would imagine that would be the same with Channel 4. And I just don't quite see how Channel 4 would be exported, considering that the entire business model is about allowing indie suppliers to retain rights to their programs. So I don't quite understand what he expects that to be. If there was a way that Channel 4 were able to somehow, I don't know, launch an in-house division or something, and they were able to have some sort of intellectual property or something that they can take and export, you know, physically, that they can export to other territories, then you might have a really interesting way of making cash. But I don't quite see it. But it's intriguing all the same.
I felt similarly. I found the concept interesting, but it was hard for me to really understand what Mark Thompson was getting at, like harness the power of Channel 4 globally. Ultimately, they could produce better, more Channel 4 style shows, quote unquote, but they wouldn't really make any money out of them because they don't own the rights to those shows. And that is, you know, that's going to handicap Channel 4 forever. I don't know if he was subtly indicating that Channel 4 should have more control over those rights. And actually, we have a Channel 4 future strategy update coming up in 2 weeks' time, I believe. So that is certainly something to keep an eye on. But we were talking earlier, Jesse, about this 10-strong panel that the government has forged to look into the future of PSB. So some of the people on this panel just quickly include Sir Robbie Gibb, who used to direct comms for Theresa May and used to work for the BBC, but has in more recent years almost outed himself as a bit of a BBC skeptic. John Hardy is on this list, the former chief executive and editor-in-chief at ITN. A couple of big super indie figures, Jane Turton, who's the chief executive of All 3 Media, and Sophie Turner-Lang, who used to run Endemol Shine Group until its Banner J takeover. And the only kind of figure from the FANGs, although we don't really use FANG anymore, do we? We stopped using that a little while ago, yeah. But Nicola Mendelsohn, who's the vice president for MA at Facebook, is the kind of Silicon Valley figure. If you'd like, Jesse, what did you think of the panel?
Well, I suppose you look at every individual person on that panel and you think they've got great credentials. Each person individually is definitely qualified to be there. And that is, I think in itself, that's a good thing, that smart people will be debating the future of where the sector is going to go. I mean, my big problem with this, and I don't think I'm going to be the only person who's said this, and Max, you and I have heard from indie sources this week, kind of quite unhappy with the makeup. And it's understandable to see why, because this panel is it's effectively 10 people, 9 of whom are white. I did some back of a fag packet.
You've crunched some numbers for us, haven't you?
I did. And these may well be inaccurate. I wouldn't take them as gospel, but from what I could tell, there was no one under the age of about sort of early 40s. Most in their sort of mid to late 50s. There is one British Asian, Samir Shah, who runs a production company and has been part of the independent sector for a long time. And there is, like you say, there is one person effectively representing Silicon Valley in the shape of Nicola Mendelsohn. But I look at that and I think, Max, all we've been reporting on this year is, or certainly one of the big, broad and kind of consistent messages we've had from the industry. David Olusoga said it. Steve McQueen said it in the piece that I did with him recently, that this is all about decision makers, right? And this is about who's in the room. And I look at that panel and I don't see diversity. I see, you had an indie source say to you, if this panel had been dreamt up in 2000 rather than 2020, you'd believe it. And I think that's a really good way of categorizing it. It feels like there just aren't enough people here who feel kind of active in what we report on, and I really hope that doesn't impact what's going on, but it does feel like a really big missed opportunity to get some younger people who have different views on how media work, and two, more diverse voices. There's not one black face in there. I also think the fact that there are, I'll just go through some of these other little things that I crunched, which suggest that it's a bit homogenous, right? So yeah, there's no one I technically under about 42. Three of them, I'd say, have sort of 3 or 4 of them have sort of direct links to the indie sector. But I would still say it feels like the indie sector is slightly sort of underrepresented here.
You'd want more, I think. You'd want more.
I think so. Perhaps you wanted someone who represents the regions, or someone who's had more experience in slightly different things. I couldn't see anyone on that panel who looked like they'd been to a comprehensive school. It looked like everyone was sort of from private or independent grammar school backgrounds. It's going to be quite difficult for these folk to have divergent opinions, I think.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think there was a kind of lack of dynamism. Maybe we're being. I don't know if we're being slightly unfair, but the headline thought about how this panel, give or take, could have been assembled in 2000, I think, is a little bit damning. Like I think the youth thing is a definite point. You're totally right on. I don't think the diverse makeup of this panel is good enough, especially considering the reckoning that the industry has been through over the past sort of half a year. But I think you just need some younger figures who are like, this is about the future of public service broadcasting, and people in the kind of 16 to 34 age bracket, the coveted age bracket that everybody talks about and everybody is desperate to appeal to, need to be represented. And I'm sure there are plenty of great figures within that age bracket who have a great understanding of where PSB needs to go in order to survive, because clearly at the same time, like, existential questions are floating around. And now on to something completely different. I won't bother trying to forge a link here, but earlier this week, I spoke with Jenny Ash, the director of Channel 5's upcoming documentary, Nuremberg, the Nazis on Trial. So this week, I am delighted to welcome Jenny Ash to the podcast. Jenny is an Emmy-nominated director and has more recently directed Channel 4's Angry White and American and 100 Vaginas. She's here today to discuss Nuremberg, the Nazis on Trial, her new Channel 5 documentary, which is produced by Middle Child Productions. Jenny, great to have you on.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, I wanted to start with asking you what drew you to this particular story.
When Andrew from Middle Child first approached me, I kind of immediately felt it'd be a really fascinating subject for a film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one of those pivotal events in history that I was aware of, but I didn't really know that much about. And, I just thought it's a story that has so much resonance now. And I really wanted to make something that would speak to a new and younger audience and get them to engage with what happened. And, the trial went on for a whole year and was filmed. I had no idea that, someone had filmed the Nuremberg trials of the American army, and they did it, as a record, not to make a film. So, making something really dramatic out of that felt like a really exciting challenge. And it's incredible footage. I mean, I just looked, Andrew sent me some of the archive, and I straight away knew that I wanted to do it. And I also had a really a more personal connection, because my dad and aunt both escaped from Nazi Germany just after Kristallnacht in 1938. And I actually spent a lot of time talking to my aunt when I was making the film. And she and her boyfriend went over to Germany just after the war as teenagers to translate for the Americans. And it was really amazing talking to her. She just gave me loads of little details that I probably wouldn't have found skimming history books. I don't know, the fact that Nuremberg stank throughout that hot summer of 1945. Because thousands of corpses were rotting under the rubble. And, it's just really great little visceral details like that. And yeah, sadly, she passed away this summer. So I've dedicated the film to her, which is nice.
Oh, that's lovely. And was there any specific work that kind of inspired you?
Well, I wanted to treat the film like a courtroom drama and make it as dramatic as I could. So I guess recent crime docs like the O.J. Simpson trial or Making of a Murderer definitely fed into that. But in style terms, I really love Asif Kapadia's work, Amy and Senna in particular. And in persuading Channel 5 that we didn't need to see anyone in vision, those films were really good references.
Yeah, it struck me. I was thinking about, while I was watching it, I was thinking about Asif Kapadia's documentaries. And it struck me that it really stands out that there's not really a narrator, and you don't really see the interviewees. Was that a kind of very deliberate choice that you made quite early on to sort of make it stand out?
Yeah, I just thought that, quite often when you watch history docs with talking heads and archive, you're kind of slightly distanced from the archive. You see it as, oh, that is, that happened in the past, and that grainy footage. Whereas I wanted it to feel as immersive and immediate as possible. So I kind of felt that, I wanted to be in the court as the case played out, and with the young war crimes investigator as he discovers a concentration camp. And I think that really helps you kind of appreciate the magnitude of it all.
What do you think there will be a lot of people watching who won't necessarily, I think you've kind of touched on this already, but do you think there'll be a lot of people watching who won't necessarily know the outcome, and therefore it will kind of act as much of a drama as it will a documentary?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people will expect that they were all convicted and they all received the death penalty, which wasn't the case. And I was really surprised. I thought I knew that, and that was really interesting. And, in fact, the trial itself was its own, like, fragile ground. It was like the first time there was a multinational prosecution, and, I'm not sure, like, people would know that people like Göring actually gave evidence in his defense, and that all the defendants felt like they had a case that might get them off a hook. And, there are times in the trial where it seemed, definitely with Göring, where it seemed to be going his way, when he rings around that prosecutor.
Yeah, it definitely struck me that there will be a lot of people watching who are kind of like on the edge of their seats, so to speak, as opposed to other documentaries where you would be very aware what happens and you're more sort of digging deeper.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was interesting, and that again builds into a new style of documentary.
Yeah, and what was really great about not having, being liberated from talking heads is I could weave all the contemporary voices, like, human rights lawyers, Philippe Sands and Dapo again. I could weave those with historical voices, which were also really present tense, like from diaries and newspaper, articles that they'd written. So I had, Gustav Gilbert, who's a court psychologist, who I think gave a really interesting psychological insight into the prisoners that I hadn't heard before. And those really acerbic female reporters, Rebecca West and Janet Flanner. I've just felt that, not being tied to talking heads liberated me, and I could, bring some different voices.
What were some of the biggest challenges in terms of sort of piecing this all together?
Oh God, right. Where do I start?
Too many to name. Pandemic,
COVID, everything being locked up, every archive library in the world being locked up. Was a big obvious one. And also it's just, I don't know, it was really hard to work out the flow of a narrative before you piece together. It was very painstaking work piecing together that archive. And some of it had been transferred, some of it hadn't, some of it wasn't filmed. So, I had this brilliant editor, Rick Barker, and we spent a lot of the edit trawling through transcripts in German. He had GCSE German, and my German's pretty rusty too. And finding, we'd have a kind of drama scene which just needed that moment, and we'd kind of search through transcripts and find it. And then I had, a brilliant AP who went and hunted for all that audio archive all over. I mean, and she found it in really unusual places online. And then she was a real kind of detective. And then I had, I think one of the best archive producers in the business.
It's obviously quite an interesting time to have a documentary like this on. And I spotted in the press release, I spotted a phrase that I liked. In the era of COVID, economic turmoil and racist violence, the mission of this film is to ensure that our darkest past is not forgotten. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, Hitler came from a world which isn't that different from the world we're in now in some ways. I mean, I think a lot of the world is turning towards authoritarianism as democracies being undermined at its heart from Trump. And even in relatively well-off and cosmopolitan societies in Europe, far-right groups and neo-Nazis are still really able to make inroads. I guess I really wanted to bring a new audience to a subject and remind them that it wasn't really that long ago that these atrocities were allowed to happen. And they've happened since all over the world, haven't they? Like in Yugoslavia, Rwanda, and Myanmar. And, I think democracy is really fragile, and the world can get swept up in a madness and hatred, which becomes normalised, and ordinary people can do evil things, and it could happen again.
Of course. We are very interested here at Broadcast about the rise of Channel 5. Could you ever have imagined making this sort of doc for Channel 5, say a few years ago?
Well, I have to say it's the first time I've ever made anything for Channel 5. And I thought it's a really brave commission. A 90-minute film, mainly in black and white, was not really what I expected when someone said Channel 5. Denise Seneviratne, our commissioning editor, was really brilliant and really up for taking risks. Especially in supporting our vision to make the film without talking heads narration. I think actually more people are doing that now, but I think when we were doing it, it was the first time they'd done it on Channel 5. So it was great having a commissioning editor who wasn't afraid of that. But yeah, I think some really just brilliant films on Channel 5 have been for the last few years.
Yeah, no, it strikes me that a kind of, as you described, a kind of younger skewing dramatic documentary is something that would not normally have sat on that channel. What do you hope the show's kind of longer lasting impact can be?
I mean, as I said, it's just really important to remember how that whole banality of evil thing, that ordinary people can do evil things, and how easily it can happen, how fragile democracy is and all that. I also hope it shows that justice can rise above vengeance. And
what do you have planned next? Is there anything else you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, I've got a few feature docs that I'm developing, and I've got a factual drama that hopefully developing for Channel 4. But yeah, I'm always kind of looking for stories that have an impact on today and aren't just simple retellings of the past. To me, documentaries are really incredibly powerful tools that can have a really profound and positive effect on an audience in a way that many other mediums can't.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on, and for letting us know a little bit more about this upcoming documentary. Thanks so much.
Absolute pleasure, and thanks for watching it, Max.
Cheers, Jenny. Thank you.
Bye.
Jenny Ash there, and the doc sounds super interesting. But Jesse Whittock is still here with me, Broadcast Insight Editor, as we move seamlessly on to our favourite part of the week. It's what we've been watching.
Sorry. I was in a world of my own right there for a second.
How could you?
I was just thinking about what I've been watching. It was so taken by it. No, Max, this week I've been watching the latest series of Billions, which is on Sky Atlantic over here. It's a US import from Showtime, so one of the Viacom CBS or premium channels. For those who don't know it, it's now in season 5, and it's basically about this sort of cat and mouse game between these two super high-powered US figures. So one of them, played by Damian Lewis, this guy Bobby Axelrod, who's a big hedge fund manager. He's sort of there to kind of represent, Wall Street and the kind of cowboy attitude and the sort of American guy who has huge influence, but you don't hear very much about. And he's sort of constantly butting heads with the Attorney General, who's sort of this like really ambitious guy who wants to get into politics and wants to, never wants to lose and takes things far too personally. And they sort of, they're friends at times, and they're not friends, and they've got sort of personal links. And there's all sorts of fun dynamics that go between them. And it's one of those series that really by now should be really stupid. So American shows have a habit of going on far too long, and really kind of losing grip on what it was that made their shows good in the first place. And you get some really strange sort of series 4s and series 5s in America, where shows just feel like they're completely dead, but they're being flogged to another 13 episodes, and they'll probably get a recommission because the ratings are just about high enough to keep them going. But it's broadly, whilst some of it's getting a bit cartoony in this latest series, it's still sort of holding up, and it's really well made. It's got some of the guys who broke the story behind the 2008 subprime mortgage crash story as creators and advisors on the story. So it's really well informed, and you always have a good time with it. The Lewis and Giamatti are like absolutely brilliant. Some great performances elsewhere, and it's very fun, and lots of it's very silly. And as you know, Max, I like a show that sort of mixes some sort of like point with being like utterly stupid, and I'd say this one does that very well. The interesting thing about this series actually is they're sort of about halfway through, and because of the production lockdown, they were obviously forced to stop. And they've still got several episodes to film, as far as I understand it. I think it might be the case now that they're a bit closer to getting it all done. But there is this. It's been one of the sort of shows over in America that's been used as a case point for how the pandemic really impacted drama. What have you been watching, Max?
Yeah, for what it's worth, I've watched the first 3 episodes of the Queens Gambit on Netflix, which I feel like is kind of the Netflix drama of the week or the month. It
feels like it, yeah. It feels like the first time chess has ever been.
I noted Anne Menzer did a talk. Anne Menzer of Netflix scripted fame did a talk earlier this week. She said she's been driven to buy a chess set by watching the show. And she made so good for her. She made the also less funny observation that this is exactly what Netflix wants to do, which is to take like kind of, I don't know, is chess popular-ish pastimes and like make big dramas about them and allow people to either get into them for the first time or like, I don't know, rein back the years. But I really like chess, but I actually, it is really good. I do feel like it's almost overly chessy. Like the second and third episodes are both involving the main character just playing chess tournaments, and like sometimes they're quite tense and exciting, and sometimes there's a lot of like watching. So the rough premise being that it's a young girl, grows up in an orphanage, gets really good at chess in the orphanage, then is adopted, starts making money via chess tournaments. She's played by Anya Taylor-Joy, who's really, really good. And you spend quite a lot of time watching her in sort of like tense chess games, invariably winning most of the time.
I was going to make some sort of joke about Anne Menzer and buying a chess set, but I decided not to, and I just decided to just tell you in this format that's what I was going to do.
You thought you'd listen to my wonderful review of the Queen's Gambit instead. You'd be really listening.
I did. I loved it, Max.
Great stuff. Well, Jesse, as ever, it's been fantastic having you on the pod, and I'm sure we will speak again soon. Thank you for listening to the Broadcast Newswrap. I'm senior reporter Max Goldbart, and you've been hearing from Insight editor Jesse Whittock and our special guest, the Emmy-nominated director Jenny Ash. This week's podcast was edited by me, Max Goldbart. You can check out past episodes of the pod on Spotify and iTunes, or on the website via www.broadcastnow.co.uk.